Hi everybody, it's Bethany and I am really excited to bring you a video lesson I've been working on for quite a while. This is an older painting of mine, but it's been in the computer in kind of an unused painting lesson file. And since I'm resting and recovering, I thought I would pull it out and edit it for you so I could share. This is on a piece of warm colored, kind of buttery, peachy pastel mat, which is something I don't often paint on. It's such a different and unique type of paper in that it really grips the pastel and can really let you have some amazing effects. Of course, I'm starting off with my pencil sketch looking at the photo reference. This is from the mountains of New Mexico. And one thing I love about Pastel Mat is I really like to use my acrylic ink application. Right now I'm using pretty much a straight but diluted wash of the acrylic ink. This is the indigo color. And I'm using a piece of cloth to swipe that acrylic ink onto the paper. I love to use cloth and fabrics and sometimes burlap because it really helps with those thready, brushy effects that are in tree branches and grasses. And one reason why I really like to use ink on Pastel Mat is that when I use alcohol, the alcohol kind of absorbs into the paper a little bit more than I like. So I really like to utilize different papers with different types of underpainting. So Pastel Mat to me works really well with the acrylic ink. One thing that I'm doing here, of course, is looking at the darks in my photo reference. I'm looking at the shadows and the light. Really marking those areas in with this acrylic ink, kind of scrubbing it in with this piece of cloth to help me get that really fun texture. If you haven't seen me utilize acrylic ink before, I really like to put the dropper in a pie plate and then I dilute it with some water to create a higher value and a lower transparency, I guess I could say. So right there where I'm working right now, that is a little bit more diluted acrylic ink than what's in the darker section. Of course, when I did that, this is really dark. This is almost purely undiluted. There's some really nice shadows in those trees. Of course, trees are usually the darkest part of our landscape. And as I'm putting this in, the subject matter really starts to form where you can see where those trees are and where the sky is going to be and where there is going to be areas of light. I often sometimes take the dropper. You can see me doing that here, drawing with it, and then I'm going to use that cloth again and scrub in that pure acrylic ink. Keep it from dripping down. I really am trying to get my values correct here in this very first beginning stage. That creates that value map that I like to talk about, which helps us in the dry pastel layering. I like to use all of these techniques. They create, when you scrub back and forth, and right here I'm kind of scratching that dropper through the acrylic ink. Of course there's a little drip there, so I want to fix that. I don't want too many spots of dark where I don't want the eye to be drawn. But I really do want the shore, or I guess the bank of this little river where it meets the grass. I want there to be a little darkness where that water naturally erodes those areas. It's really fun to use different types of materials other than just our soft pastels or just alcohol with hard pastel. Acrylic ink is really fun, and I highly suggest that you try it, especially on Pastel Mat. It's a great combination. Okay, this is the next day. I think I'm wearing something different and the lighting is a little different in my studio. I am using right here a piece of vine charcoal, and I'm looking at the reference, of course. I'm looking at the trunks of the trees, once again establishing some darks, always starting with the darker colors and darker values in the beginning stages. I love to use charcoal in my paintings. Nice black, and it washes in easily into the paper, and so if there's any time that I need to correct something, I can easily just soften that back down. I really like to make sure that the bases of my trees are nice and shadowed. That creates really nice contrast within the entire piece, because I know I'm going to have some really light values, especially in the areas right now that don't have any pigment on them. It's just straight paper. Now, I really like to use blues in trees, especially really just analogous colors, using blue as the base for my shadows of my trees, and then working towards more green. Green and blue are next to each other in the color wheel, and it creates a nice calm environment. But it also helps us avoid everything being too green, just green, green, green. There's a little bit of different color hue going on, so it creates a little bit more interest in the piece. Right now I just moved to a dark green, a cool dark green Richardson. Now I am going to be using several different color temperatures of green in this piece. And here you can see that I moved into a warmer color. Now when you're really wanting to kind of break up your greens, that's a really nice way to do it, which is choosing different color temperatures of the same color, or the same hue, simplified hue anyway. If you really squint down, these colors blend together, and that's because they're very close in value one to another. This is a really excellent way to layer on different hues without being too garish. I'm not trying to go bright too quickly. I'm thinking of climbing the ladder of value, going from dark to light, one step at a time, and this helps in the final painting. The area on the left is receiving more light than the shadowed trees on the right. I'm going to be purposefully making this area a little brighter and more colorful, which kind of goes against the rules of art. Usually things in the distance we're going to make more muted and subdued. But this area is catching a lot of light as the light is streaming across this little river bend. To mute that down a little bit, I'm adding in some neutral, this is kind of a neutral Mars violet ochre color. Of course, adding in a little bit of yellow too to signify that sunlight coming across. It's going to break up this tree line a little bit to where those trees on the left and the right don't seem like they're in the same plane. As I'm moving up in value up that ladder, you can literally see me moving up the trees. The trees, as they go more towards the light, are going to be receiving more light. So I use lighter colors, lighter values in the upper branches of these trees. I'm using a really pretty neutral, cool green here. That's kind of my base color for those upper areas of the trees. Also have some really true greens. This is just an Irish Irish green is what I like to call it, really grassy green. And then, of course, yellow greens are in those distant trees. That's going to signify that sunlight that we talked about. If you've watched any of my videos before, sometimes I really like to underpaint warm, light-filled areas with warm colors like pink or red or orange. In this case, I'm using the paper color itself to be my base, which is this nice, warm, buttery yellow. Going just directly into that with my dry pastel, smoothing it a little bit with my finger, but it really doesn't move around the pastel a lot. Like I said earlier, pastel matte has this really unique surface and really grips that pastel until you get a certain amount of pastel on the paper. It doesn't really move around a lot. So if you're used to using UArt or Le Carte or Lux Archival, pastel matte takes a little bit of just fumbling around at first until you can kind of get the hang of it. I'm using yellow. This is kind of a goldenrod, harder pastel for the light-filled areas where the light is splashing down on the water. If you really observe water, especially shallow water, it's very, very golden where there's a lot of light. And the reason for that is often because the rocks themselves that are in the water have a very golden or just more yellow tone to them versus the water. I'm really trying to use a very light touch here and all really across the board. I haven't tried to push down too hard on with my pastels. That really fills that tooth with pigment. Here I'm blending a little bit with some gap filler foam. I love to use that. If you have any questions about that product, I have that product and others on my blog, and I've linked them many times. Just go to your local hardware store and ask for gap filler foam. It's wonderful. It comes in this really long roll. It's great for blending without removing too much of the pastel. But I'm using a fairly light touch here. I don't want to fill the tooth. This is key if you want to be able to layer quite a bit, and also helps you save your pastels, and it also helps you correct any mistakes that, or just wrong values, wrong color, maybe you just put something down and you didn't like it. If you're using a light touch, then that is much easier to correct than if you're really pushing down hard. I think having a light touch is one of the hardest things to develop, especially for a beginner pastelist. So really try to work hard to just barely kiss the surface of that paper. I have said before, kind of in a funny way, that apply your pastels like you're petting a baby duck. It's very, very soft, just barely petting that paper with that pastel. This really nice sanded surface will accept that pastel very easily, so you don't have to press hard if you're using really nice professional grade pastels. In this lower right hand corner, I am putting a just touch of purple. This speaks a little bit, that peach right there also speaks a little bit to the colors that I put in that distant tree on the left. That way the color isn't so isolated and makes a little bit of sense. If there's a little bit of this peachy kind of terracotta color in those trees that are receiving light up there in the left, I'm going to balance that color with some of the same hue, maybe not the same pastel, in that lower bottom right. And that way the eye kind of bounces around. It also gives a nice base for this very vibrant, very light value green that I just put down. Gives a little base to that color so it's not too stark on the paper. There are a few little rocks. Actually, there were a lot of rocks in this little river. I'm only going to paint a few because I don't want to break it up too much. I really like what I have, and so I'm trying to be very careful not to overfill the tooth, make too many marks, and just go a little bit too far. I often get asked, how do I know if something is finished? And when it starts to reveal itself, when a painting is starting to feel pretty good, I really like the foreground right now. So it's starting to feel good to me. So I'm not trying to layer on too much more because I already have a good thing going. Whenever you're painting and whenever you have that little glint of, oh, I kind of like this, that right then is when you need to step away or slow down. Even if you're stepping away for 10 minutes to go grab another cup of coffee or some glass of water, or to take a walk around the block, whatever you do in your normal day, whenever you start to feel like things are starting to go well and you can see the painting spirit come alive, that's when you need to step away and just give yourself a little break, almost giving yourself perspective. Because when we step away from a painting, it's almost as if we are seeing it through different eyes. You can take a picture of your painting. I often do that while I'm working. And then if I have to go take my kids on an errand or go do something, I can look at the picture, see it in almost a thumbnail version of itself. And that reveals a lot to me. I can see where the shapes aren't accurate or not working, or maybe there's a value or some color is isolated, not being represented somewhere else in the piece. All of those things really, really help us analyze our art and problem solve. I'm adding in some sky color here using broken color. So I'm using some purples, some light turquoise, and some peaches. All of those colors are represented somewhere in the painting. Really helps with the vibrancy of the piece. It's always fun to add the sky. It's really makes things come together. I usually add the sky at the end of a painting. It's not something I like to put in the very beginning stages. Cutting into those distant tree lines and carving in some interesting shapes into those tree branches is really, really fun. Now that I've got the majority of this piece finished, really just have a few minor adjustments to make. And I really like looking back at these for my own inspiration. if you've never recorded yourself painting, it's really eye-opening to see a piece come together and the decision-making process that goes into creating a painting. Most of the treetops don't have a lot of pastel on them, so I'm pulling in a really very, very close to the same hue that's on the paper with that first or first acrylic ink wash. This nice, very cool neutral green. I don't really want a lot of eyes to be attracted to the very top of the piece. That's not where my focal point is. My focal point is much more, of course, by the river bend and with the really bright colors, but I do feel like I need to add some kind of pastel. Here I'm almost going horizontal marks. That really helps if you're trying to paint pine trees and different types of trees, not just deciduous trees.
It smells like cake.
Changing up the colors a little bit. Stepping away a lot. Now that's something that you don't see me do in these videos. I step away a lot, go take a break like I mentioned earlier, going to grab another cup of coffee. Coming back and looking at it with fresh eyes always helps. Just tiny little touches. There's just a few minutes left on this video lesson, and I just wanted to thank you so much for watching it. Thank you so much for your support, especially during this difficult time. I have so many more pieces that I want to paint for you, and it's been really fun to look back at this painting in this really special place. This is some land that my husband's family has had in their family for over 100 years, and it's just a really, really beautiful spot in eastern New Mexico. Thank you for watching it, and I will have a new lesson hopefully soon. Enjoy!